Think we're ready to go. We had a nice warm-up act here with the music, so thank you, everyone. Uh, really nice to see you all, and I know it's after lunch, so even more kudos for coming here. It can be, the 2 o'clock can be a tough time of day right after lunch, so um, my name's Ken Carpenter. I'm glad to be here to talk about our work, and with my longtime colleague, Dr. Foote. I am a clinical psychologist by training, and in the spirit of some of the conversation from earlier this morning, I'm a dad, and I wear a dad hat, so I can't help but think about my experiences when we talk about families. I always tell people I've had more training in how to drive a car than when I was taking my sons home from the hospital to start that journey on parenthood. So, you know, it is a journey, and navigating that is complicated, and certainly the spirit of this conference talks about all the complications that can come with parenting and being a caring loved one. Today we're going to really talk about the work we've been doing and focusing a little bit more exclusively on how awareness and values can be brought into this idea of supporting a loved one who is struggling. It is a technical workshop, so in the spirit of that, we're going to try to bring some exercises out here and include you. One, so you get a sense of how do we bring these concepts to life when we're offering it to family members or others are offering it to family members, and at the same time, maybe give you a sense of what it's like for family members who may be experiencing or hearing about these ideas for the first time. I got a really nice appreciation for the history here, and I'm just going to spend a couple of moments placing our work in the context of the bigger historical context. And all this slide is really talking about is just a sampling of the idea that family members, when they are introduced to a loved one who's struggling and are trying to make sense of that, that their situation in and of itself deserves attention and deserves a compass. And there have been many different types of compasses offered to families across time. Here's just in the English literature, going way back to the 70s, where interventions came from. And then the idea of unilateral treatments, which kind of got penned around 82, where that term came to be, which is how to help family members who are reaching out, regardless of where their loved one is in the change process. What families introduced across all these techniques are variable. Each of these come at it from a different angle, offer a different set of skills and perspectives, yet they do all share and are cousins in the sense that often families are looking for a guidance and compass to how to be most helpful for the people they love. What isn't on there is the rich history of family therapy systems, nor am I even talking about the peer space, where peers are helping peers. So unilateral treatment interventions, when we position our talk today, is really about how, in that lane, professionals are offering guidance to families who are saying, my loved one may or may not be on board with making change at this time. And if we unpack that, while all the techniques are different and strategies can vary, we tend to think of it coming out of the gate in three kind of buckets. How can we help you as a family member focus on yourself and position yourself as part of the helping context? So that's kind of helper focused. And many of these strategies speak to families and say, how do you view your loved one? How do you interact with your loved one? And then these strategies can differ, but often fall in the buckets of behavioral type of strategies, and is highlighted even in the last day and a half, communication strategies. We can even dig deeper, and when you go through it, you see all the lists up here. It's not comprehensive, that here are all the different strategies that are offered to families in the unilateral space when they're looking to help a loved one. Self-care strategies, or focusing on self as a helper, can be about social support, activity building, learning CBT skills, even phrases such as how do you detach, how do you create boundaries. So you can see a lot of variability here in how helpers are asked to think about supporting themselves. And when family members are asked, when I want to interact with my loved one and be supportive, here are a host of other strategies, both in the behavioral domains, and we've heard even earlier for some of the talks on positive reinforcement, which Kraft puts out there, natural consequences, limit setting. These are just some of the ideas that are offered to families, as well as communication strategies. So again, pulling back many different styles, many different models, all kind of sharing these three domains. Yet, we'd like to offer another domain. We can think about caring for self, which we'll talk about, communication strategies, and behavioral strategies. But family members are also offered explicitly or implicitly a set of lenses to view their loved one. Explicitly, when families like, how should I see my loved one? How should I look at them? How can I come to understand this? They can be given models of addiction. They can be given from genetic, biological, to social theories of addiction, the psychoeducational piece of that. And just as importantly, implicitly, which is if that's not even offered, the language and the way their loved ones are spoken about, the words that are used to describe them, the words that are used to describe family members, also gives them a set of lenses to see themselves and their loved one. So these four components, when we think about creating a helping context, are kind of the undercurrent of many of these unilateral models and present a context for where Jeff and I are going to go today in terms of how to help families see their loved one, think about their position in a helping context, and how they have a compass for interacting with the loved ones they're trying to support. Now, I listed all of these as separate components, but one thing we'd like to highlight is they all interact. How I see myself as a helper can also be influenced on how I see the person I'm trying to help. How I see the loved one I'm trying to help can influence how I see myself as a helper, how I want to interact with them, how I want to be present with them. And it's this complex and kind of interactional dynamic perspective that we start to see really defines this helping space, which is how do they travel together, and they provide different on-ramps for creating a helping context. And importantly, as a person who wants to be a helper, I can't divorce myself from the helping context. I am part of that. So this interactional kind of perspective of all these components interacting kind of defines the set of lenses that we operate from that we've called the invitation to change approach, which is an interactional model that pulls together not only how to help family members interact with their loved ones and be supportive, but how to see themselves in the helping process and offer a compass of skills in that process of helping, which can occur over time. But we're going to take a little bit of a dive and explanation of that and then bring our lenses back to what does it mean to help care for oneself as a helper.
Hello, everybody. So we're going to now just start to talk about this particular model that we've been working on for a number of years. We've heard a lot about craft today, which is a godsend to actually go to a conference and hear about craft, because many of you have probably had the experiences in your professional lives of talking about craft with people and having people have no idea except for wondering if you're going to get out coloring books and knitting and stuff like that. And that's their understanding of craft. So it's nice that craft has actually emerged and taken its place in the universe. We have spent a lot of time over the last 10 years moving from craft only to something that we now call the invitation to change. So it's a different model. It is grounded in craft. It's grounded in MI. It's grounded in acceptance and commitment therapy, which may be familiar or not so familiar to folks here. is grounded in self-compassion work of Neff and Germer, and several other things. We kept calling it craft for a number of years until I realized that Bob Myers was going to just be so mad at me for calling it craft that we should stop calling it craft. So we don't call it craft anymore. We call it the invitation to change. And it's been an iterative process of development. It's something that we worked on in doing trainings with some of the people here in this room around the US, and really was based on getting feedback from families. Like, what do you guys get about this? What do you understand? Does this make sense? Is this language we're using? Because we wanted to really focus on accessibility and not have this be an academic model that would sit on a shelf somewhere and people would never understand unless I was a professional. So from the get-go, this has been designed to be sort of a organic, it makes sense to me as a human and as a family member what you're talking about, and it resonates with me in a way that I feel like I can use. The issue of accessibility is one that's incorporated in the model, in the language, in the pictures, in everything else that we use around it. But accessibility is also directly related to then dissemination. And dissemination, as Dr. Orford was talking about this morning, is the bane of all of our existences. There's lots of helpful models, craft being one of them, invitation to change being one of them, some of the other ones that the five-step model, having people understand this and even have heard of it outside of folks in this room is incredibly challenging. I'm not going to talk about this today, but so that's one of the issues for us. We have spent a huge amount of effort in having this be training for lay people. So when we do trainings, we've certified people in the last three years. Like 600 people have become certified in this particular methodology. And that's a complete mixture of professionals to lay people. And the trainings are designed to not have a differentiation between I'm a professional, so aren't I getting a different kind of training than the mom next to me? And it was like, no, you're not. You're getting the same training, the same language. It's not special rarefied language for professionals, because that's going to kill the model. If it stays with us professionals, we can't do it. There's numbers that Dr. Orford was talking about earlier. It measured in hundreds of millions of families affected by this stuff, and how many healthcare professionals are there, and how many healthcare professionals deal with addiction issues, and how many healthcare professionals in addiction deal with evidence-based ideas. It's like tiny. So the efforts to go online and get this stuff online that Jane is doing is incredibly helpful approaches. One of the ways we have tried to focus on this is we got to train lay people. We got to make this a model that can be given into communities, and y'all can just do it and don't worry about us. And here's your manual, and this is a manual written, and you go to our training, and then you get this manual, and you can do it, and you'll never talk to us again. In a perfect world, you should never have to talk to us again. And that's another way to try to think about dissemination. The researchers in us, being Dr. Carpenter, his hair stands on end when we do this, because then the question is fidelity. What are these people doing out there? They're running these groups. What are you talking about? They don't know how to do this. You're not professionals. Right, they're not professionals. That's exactly what we hope. They're not professionals doing these groups. That's what we've tried to create, is a culture where non-professionals can take this on and feel empowered to do this kind of work. That's a little background on where we've tried to go with this. There we go. The model itself, we're going to focus on a piece of the model because we just don't have time to go through the whole model, but I'm going to quickly go through the model. The elements behind this are several behavioral and motivational elements that go into this approach. But they are in toto focused on motivation and helping people understand the why behind other human beings' behaviors. Behavioral reinforcement strategies, which would come strictly out of behavioral treatments, craft being one of those behavioral treatments. Communication training, which would be coming directly out of things like motivational interviewing and many other trainings in communication protocols. Mindfulness practices, present moment focus, self-awareness ideas, And those, in our model, lead to self-compassion. So self-compassion is something we're going to talk about today as rooted in self-awareness. And that's the piece that we wanted to focus on today because it actually seems like the most different part of this model from other behavioral or motivational approaches, which is including the helper in the change process directly, and the awareness of themselves as part of the process of effective change. So the model itself has that cool circle there, see, and that's a circle that we use to have images so people can help remember this. Like one of the things that's really awesome about 12-Step Fellowship is they have the best slogans ever, and people remember it. One day at a time, yeah, that's freaking great. I will never forget that, and it's a profound idea. And I'll put it on my car and as a bumper sticker, and I'll never forget it. So can we come up with ideas that people will remember in the middle of fighting with their kids? You know, like that's what you want. Something that's, oh yeah, I gotta remember to hit the pause button. I gotta remember, I saw a red light, I'm gonna stop now. I'm not gonna start to talk to them about their drinking right now. Those are the kind of ideas we're trying to incorporate in terms of accessibility and usability of these approaches. So there's three major sections in this approach: helping with understanding. We call all of these helping with. So how do I help with understanding? How do I help with awareness? And how do I help with action? Action is where people often want to start. Teach me how to speak differently and teach me how to do behavioral reinforcement stuff. We say, let's start up here at the top with understanding. The section we're going to focus on today is awareness, but understanding is sort of a foundational idea of how to connect with another person who's upsetting me, who I want to have change, who I want to yell at, and who I wish would stop doing all these things that are making me feel bad. How do I understand where you're coming from? How do I understand basic ideas like the first one there, which is your behavior actually makes sense? How do I give that to a family member and have them get their head around the fact that they're not doing this to torture you, they're doing it because it makes sense to them. They're doing it because it's reinforcing for them as human behavior. And there's a list of 100 reasons why it might be reinforcing to them. So having that basic connection with another person who's acting in ways that I'm hoping to invite or encourage change to occur in, I need to understand where they're coming from. It's kind of a foundational idea. It seems very straightforward. It's mind-blowing for family members when they change the way they're perceiving the person in front of them from somebody who's just causing terrible, agonizing pain to somebody who I can understand. You are my son, and I understand what you're doing because you're feeling less anxious when you drink. And I don't have to feel so angry with you anymore because I can hold that here as well as encouraging change. The other interesting thing about the helping with understanding section is this is back to also what was mentioned this morning, and I've increasingly felt this for my 35 years in this field, that stigma crushes everything. And if we don't deal with stigma in the people we're trying to help, we're going to lose the battle. And that stigma around substance issues is just toxic and permeates everything, and the families sitting in front of you have their heads filled with it because they live in the world and because of their own lived experience of how upsetting all this stuff is, and black and white answers and stigmatizing ways of thinking about stuff are very easy to come by. So how do we help them understand this in a different way so that they aren't feeling that they want to stigmatize the person they're trying to help themselves? But to not forget that they're swimming in that culture themselves. Okay. The awareness section is what we're going to turn to next, and Ken's going to step back up for that. But as I said a second ago, this idea of helping with increased self-awareness is one that's based on the idea of if I'm going to be part of this change process, I can have all kinds of communication tools and reinforcement strategies and so forth, but if I have no awareness of myself, I'm not going to use them very well. And I need to be able to check in. I need to be able to bring some self-compassion, and I need to be able to bring something called willingness, which comes more from ACT land, acceptance commitment therapy, as a way to try to navigate these processes that I'm trying to engage in with my loved one. So that's about creating a different context in our family. My awareness of myself, my willingness to be part of this process, and my ability to bring some self-compassion to myself in this process. I'm going to show you a short video of context and ask you to just take a breath, watch this video, and just as a family member, because this is the pool that the people who are coming for help from us are swimming in. So just to take a minute to sit with these words and see how they make you feel, okay? So we're going to go through that. This is the audience participation part of our program. So any thoughts? Brilliant, thank you. Any reactions anybody noticed in yourself in watching those words? Physical reactions, emotional reactions?
Well, the first words were really a compendium of all the stigma that is related to addictions.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you put forward how it should be.
Thanks. Other reactions? Yeah. Right. She said the language in the first part is incredibly normalized, so people don't even have a sense that it's stigmatizing language in any way, right? It's just sort of how people talk about this, right? That's what's in the movies. That's what people say to me when I talk about my kid, or I don't talk about my kid because that's what they say to me. So we just want to underline that part as the context of trying to help families. It really is what they have in their heads. Like every second, it's what they have in their heads. And you can have a nice meeting with them and explain a lot of things, and they're going to go home and their uncle is going to tell them that stuff. And they're going to come back and go, yeah, I don't know what you guys are talking about here. It's just an incredibly challenging environment for people. So I'll hand it back to Ken.
You know, as mentioned, those words can be applied to individuals that family members are trying to help, care for, struggle with. And there's a lot of also words that get tethered to that when they think about themselves, and how that's associated with perhaps their own chatter on failure, the hopelessness that comes with that. and just carrying the weight of those words as they get up every day to try to step into a helping space. And as Jeff mentioned, when people are looking for help, they always, but a common request is, let's get to the action. Tell me what to do. And what to do is in the context of how you see yourself as a helper. Do you make room for that? We use the word self-care, but I kind of like to change that when we think about that, because self-care can be activities, but what does it mean to care for yourself? And that flip is kind of where we go with awareness. What does it mean when you sit with yourself and you bring a caring approach to your human condition and what your journey is like in the context of those words and the judgments that are out there? So we position caring for self more as this invitation that comprised of three types of skills. How do you allocate your awareness to self? This concept of willingness we'll talk about, and self-compassion. I always kind of think that in order to even engage in self-care, you have to find the self to care for. And often that self is missing in a lot of ways when life is chaotic, full of fires to put out, and juggling a lot. Self gets lost. So how do we help people find the self to care for? Well, we start with this first skill of just the idea of self-awareness. People are like, yeah, I get that, yeah, sure. But what's it like to step in and increase the awareness of what you're carrying? So it's a simple in idea, not always in practice. But how do you go about finding the self to care for? And often it just starts with practicing skills of slowing down. What does it really mean to slow down and check in with yourself on what are you feeling now? What's going on physically? What's the chatter in your mind throughout the day? Where does your mind bring you in terms of the past or the future? There's a lot of times I know there's a lot about grief with the actual physical loss of a loved one. But families always talk about the symbolic grief of living in a future that hasn't happened yet and preparing for that. Or grieving the futures that they had envisioned with their loved one and for themselves. And this is not what they had envisioned, and they're grieving that. So all those processes going on are often what people are coming to the door with when they're asking, help me be a better helper. Well, let's find the you that wants to step into that space. And it opens up some possibilities. Right? It allows for connection. If I can connect with myself, that makes some rooms to be able to see and connect with my loved one differently. It acknowledges and validates the heavy lifting that goes on to be a family member and a loved one, trying to support someone. As was talked about this morning, just the unpredictability of being on this long journey, and for many families it's very long, and not knowing what each day is going to bring. But being able to acknowledge that, being able to say, this is what I carry, this is the weight. And that starts to at least shift how people start to sit with themselves. I know there were exercise packets out there. If you have it, great. If not, you can do this. But I would like to invite all of you. You know, you've been sitting here today. You think about your lives, maybe the loved ones you're supporting, or if you're wearing a professional cap, clients that you're trying to help and you think about throughout the day. But if you take a moment to just think about some of the weight you're carrying and the hat that you want to wear, can you just take a moment to write what some of the heavy lifting is? You know? What's that feel like? What are the things that show up when you just slow down and think about the things you're trying to tackle? Well, you don't have to reveal it or not. I'm going to have that. But I just invite you to take a minute or so to jot down those lifts. You can even put a number to it as, this is a light lift, or I know when I'm asked to pick up that weight, it feels almost impossible to pick up. Not asking people to shout out, but if people want to just mention a number, I don't know how many people have just ones on their sheet. Some twos, threes, some threes, fours, fives. We got fives, yeah. I just ask you to contemplate these questions when you think about what you've written down. What's it like to even take a minute, minute and a half out of a talk to write down these difficulties? Was it a relief? Was it felt like a nuisance? Did it bring up uncomfortability? How often do you get to talk about these with other people? How often do you share the things that you wrote down? And if you imagine you speaking to someone, what would that person be like? And what would that feel like to share what you've jotted down? And we'll do this exercise with families. And again, it's not always the preferred exercise, because why are you asking us to do this when I know I've got all this going on? And yet, when we're talking about creating a helping context, the skills we'll be talking about become more impactful if we can at least help you find the self that's stepping into this process and acknowledging that. But bringing awareness to just the experiences as a practice, and this is a practice. Often we're not oriented to it, but how you can do this once a day. There's also another element to this. Not only are we asking you to find the self in your experiences, but Jeff's going to talk about the other way to bring attention as a helper. That's also part of finding self.
Right, so that first set of questions is, if you bring awareness to yourself, what do you notice? And that's an interesting exercise with families because what they notice often is not good things. And we're going to get to that in the willingness part of this. But if the focus is how do I feel better, often people are going to be disappointed. And that can be related to this is why I don't check in with myself. So there's multiple blocks here to self-awareness. If I were to slow down in this way we just walked through for 2 minutes, maybe I'll start to spiral into depression or hopelessness. And so I'm not going to do that. So stop asking me to do that. Another incredibly important anchor then is why would I do that? It is to get back to myself who may have gotten lost in this process as a parent, as a sibling, as a whoever, of somebody who is struggling in this way. I have lost any focus on myself and I'm totally outwardly focused, often catastrophically focused, and fear and anxiety focused. Is there something else I can focus on? And one of those things could be, what do I care about and how do I want to show up as a person? Who am I as a person? What are my values as a person? What are my values as a parent or a helper? How do I want to show up? And that could be anything, and this is very individualized. It's not like, and here's the ways to show up, and here's the values you should have. It's what are your values, and how would you like to show up in case you have forgotten yourself, which you probably have in this process. And it's the anchor for people then to go through this pain that they're going to be going through and that they're already going through. So I'm going to go through another exercise with you. And again, these are all ones that you can use. I can't find a little picture of the, it doesn't seem to be, there we go. So there's our prompt. If you're comfortable sitting back and being comfortable, getting in a more comfortable position and closing your eyes, feel free to do that. If you don't want to close your eyes sitting in a conference room, you don't need to. And even if you have your eyes open, I'll just encourage you to take a couple of deep breaths, just for a moment. This is something called the 80th birthday exercise. And what I'd like you to think about is someone in your life who's been important to you, who has struggled in really important, in big ways, potentially. It doesn't have to be substance use. It could be substance use. For many folks in this room, it might be. But it could be other really big challenges for someone that you care deeply about in your life. And as you think about that person and the way that you have been there for them, and now imagine that this is your 80th birthday, and people are gathering to honor you on your 80th birthday for reaching 80 and for the life you have led. And you can imagine this in any way you would like. It could be in a room that's special to you in your house. It could be in a park where people have gathered to honor you. Just letting yourself take in that environment and where you're standing with that group of folks and looking around to see who those people are who've come to honor you. People who are important in your life, in your history. And at some point, this person who had struggled in their life, perhaps mightily, is standing up and clinking their glass, and they're going to offer a toast to you. And as you imagine that person raising their glass to you, to let yourself think about what would be the words that you would like to hear them say about you. How would you like to hear them describe how you showed up for them during that period of time in their life when they were struggling? And what words would make your heart fill up for how you had been and who you had been for them? And as you imagine that, the next question would be, that person that they were describing, that you who showed up for them, how connected do you feel with that person who's being honored at your 80th birthday? How much are you living the way that those words are being used to describe you? And then what would you need to do today to start to become more of that honored person, if you wanted to be showing up in that way that's being described with those words? Okay. Well, that's our brief version of this, and I'll bring you all back here now. Any thoughts on that exercise? In the experience of the difference between what you heard and how you are? Actually, let me go back to the first question. What ways were you wanting to be described as a helper? We're going to wait until somebody answers, by the way, just so you know.
I think I'll risk myself. You were able to take anger out of the interaction, or even some anxiety. And I think that is very, very productive for the person in front of us.
Okay, so that's what they're saying to you. You didn't approach me with anger.
Voila.
Right, great, thank you.
Anger and sometimes anxiety, because this person, they're unpredictable. So
Yep.
you really don't know, and that is the source of anxiety.
Yeah,
And
yep.
sometimes there is depression also because there has been losses
Sure.
that are linked to the experience with this person.
Yeah, yep, thank you. Other words people used that you would have liked to have heard? Yes. Compassionate, okay. Thank you. So part of the reason for this exercise is it gives people a way to be intentional about how they want to show up. So we can give people tools and explain to them how good they are, and it's really good to ask open-ended questions and reflections and affirmations and so forth and so on. Those are all awesome tools. If I have no anchor as to why I'm using those and how I want to show up, I'm less likely to use them. And I can't hold on to them in the face of those types of things, the anxiety, the depression, the fear. So how do we help people get anchored back in understanding themselves, the self-awareness stuff that Ken was talking about, and then what do I care about? Why am I trying to show up and help this person, and in what ways do I want to show up? So that's the second part of this self-awareness, okay? I'll hand it back to you, Ken.
Feels like I'm in the fast lane, although hopefully it's not being experienced that way as far as my experience of my pacing. We can help people find themselves and start that, connect with values, which is that compass, which is, using these tools are in the service of something. Can they be in the service of what's important to you and the way you want to be in this context as a helper? And I think that's a counter-narrative often to a family say that in every other helping space, they're allowed to be present the way they want to be. But when it comes to substance use, and they're thinking, how can I be of help? The experience is I have to be a different type of person. And sometimes there's a pressure to put my values at the door because I'm being told I have to be this way in order to help in this space, which is really challenging. And the self-awareness and the values exercise is also giving permission to people to say, you're allowed to keep your values, and you're allowed to think about how you want to show up in this context of helping. Let's talk. Let's talk about this, and let's flesh it out. Okay? And it doesn't mean it's easy, as Jeff mentioned, when we ask people to think about awareness, sometimes they're starting to experience aspects of this that they've tried to kind of avoid for a while. So the winds blow pretty hard. Or they've just never slowed down to think about it. And then the issue is what keeps you grounded. And as Jeff said, in this picture or as a metaphor, it's the roots. And we think of the roots as the values. Right? Everything here that you're experiencing, stepping towards, is in the service of something that's important to you. And then we can help you articulate that and connect with that. Because we do live in a world where sometimes there seems to be this choice out there, and this is also in your exercise packet. You can just look at it here. If I just ask you to think about two things in these circles. One, what matters to me in my relationships, the way I want to be with my loved ones, and what are my uncomfortable or painful feelings and thoughts that come with trying to help that individual. And we'll ask people to jot those down, just a couple words. Right? And if the world was set up that says, pick the one you want, which circle would you want to pick up? The what matters circle? How many people would pick the what matters circle up? Yeah, his hand, sure, right? And often we can think about that, right? That this is this is the way the world asks us to think. Which one do we want? Let me work to find that. But what if the world was actually making this the decision? Not which side you want, but that both sides are really on the same coin. That the things that matter most, the things we try to connect with most, can also be the ones that can cause significant pain and discomfort and emotional upset. So it's not about having one side. We can work hard to try to separate that side, and often families do. Just tell me what to do so I can do it right and get that. Yet this scenario says, as you step towards things that are close, and often, why are families in this for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Right? Because they care about something. There's a value there. And yet, moving towards that is really, do I want to pick up the coin? When I hold on to what's important to me, how do I also sit with what's on the other side of that? And that can be a difficult challenge if the belief is I only want one side, as opposed to the choice being, and it always is a choice. Do you want to pick up the coin in this particular circumstance? Get closer to what's important, knowing what could be attached to that, or choose in some ways to not take that coin in that moment? Because it is human experience to not want that other side of the coin. There's nothing wrong with just wanting the positive side. Yet often, when we're working with families, we want to help reposition this idea of where's the discomfort and the pain coming from. And can we make moving towards values, that's what this discomfort is in the service of. And that can get lost. And that gets lost when values get lost. So trying to control another person, controlling ourselves, is really another akin to putting a coin down, which is there are things I don't want to experience in this process. But this idea of willingness is just making a choice to step forward. And it's not a mandate, it's not a demand, and it's never something we bang over the heads of people, but it's really a discussion on, let's think what it feels like to move towards the things that are important to you in that exercise that Jeff mentioned. Because man, I could be as mad as hell of you, and I just spoke to Dr. Foote, and we practiced positive communication. And you did something actually today that was different, and my mind is just rehashing the 10 years of how much you hurt me. That's a real tough space to be in, to practice a new skill. Right? That's hard. So what's it in the service of? Why would you want to reinforce? Why would you want to talk differently? Because you may be doing that, experiencing anger and anxiety. But that's willingness. That's making room for that history and those experiences, because it's in the service of being the version of yourself that you want to be. So that is caring for self. That's finding self, and then that is thinking about how I can employ and move towards the version of myself that we want to be. And that takes practice. It's not easy, and particularly when we think about skills, and we're good at offering skills, but implementing skills is implemented in the context of a history and the ups and downs of everything that comes with trying to navigate this space. And that doesn't always mean I'm going to feel good about using this skill. So why would I want to? Again, I'll link to values. It's in the service of that. And repositioning that helps people relate to themselves differently and relate to their experiences differently. It starts to open some room and some space to maneuver and to step into what would be difficult situations that might be avoided, but in the process of moving towards what's important. What time do we have?
We have multiple people telling us we have 10 minutes.
Oh, I totally missed that. I know, and I asked you for the sign, and again, I think I got to go the neon version on that next time. Do we even have time for the close button? Or do we just want to mention that? I'm just going to highlight in your packet, there's something called the pause button, which is how do you put this into play with people, and you'll notice there are steps in terms of how bringing awareness, finding values, and then in there making a decision. We won't have time to run through it, but it is an exercise that families have found very helpful in those challenging circumstances where I'm not feeling like I can do this new skill. How can I make space to try it out? And the pause button has resonated with people, is that momentary cue to let me find my values so I can respond differently here. Like those slogans that Jeff was saying, it's a model that's been helpful.
So the last, I don't think we have any more circles drawn there. We do. So back to our circle. We have been talking about this section, helping with awareness. So what we talked about was self-awareness, which includes even recognizing my emotional states, my physical states, my thoughts, right, as a sort of a basic grounding. And then what are my values? How do I want to show up? If you then take that awareness of yourself and say, okay, here's how I'm showing up, and this doesn't feel so great because this is not so great. What is happening is not what I would have ever chosen. We're on a path as a family that feels really scary at times. Am I willing to stay connected to this process, as opposed to lots of cultural and previous messaging in the universe around substances, which is you're supposed to step away, right? There's not a person in this room who hasn't heard that message about detaching, and how many families are told to detach, which is just sort of rends the fabric of families to shreds. It's the last thing on earth they want to do. Doesn't mean that understanding boundaries and limit setting isn't a really good idea. It is. It's a really good idea. The idea that I need to detach and let you go off and figure this out doesn't make sense for most families and isn't actually helpful either. So if I am going to stay here and be connected and help you in ways that are helpful, I'm going to experience pain. So the middle section of this that Ken just described, this idea of willingness, is really a reorientation to pain, which is weird as a model, right? Doesn't sound that fun, but it really is a reorientation to my experience of pain and what it means. And what it might really mean is I'm doing things that matter a lot to me. I'm staying connected to someone who I dearly love, who is breaking my heart. And I want to stay connected to them, because this matters to me. And I've got all kinds of tools you're going to teach me, thank goodness. And what you're not telling me is you're going to feel better. You're going to feel like $1 million. We're going to get on the right path and it's all going to be good. That is not a actual hope-inducing message for families, because in a second it gets smashed to bits, and then it's not true. So things can get better. You can do this. You can stay connected. You can love them is a message that gives people lots of hope. And that's the piece of feedback that we get over and over from families is, I realized I could still love my husband, my son, even though this is incredibly painful. That's a hopeful message. So that last part of this circle, of this section of the circle then, about self-compassion, is not about feeling better and pats on the back and hopeful messaging and forgetting about stuff and don't worry, or detaching and doing the black and white thing of just getting this person away from me. I'm going to send them to rehab. I'm going to send them to wilderness camp. I'm going to do all those things that are going to make the problem go away, and then they'll get fixed, right? That's what's going to happen? Maybe, but probably not. So can we notice ourselves? That's what we mean by self-compassion. Can we notice what our compassionate reactions for ourselves? Can we hold ourselves more gently and with more compassion, a more compassionate stance? And can we stay in the present, which would be another piece of self-compassion? And all of those things give people tools. It, as a starting point for family members, validates how difficult this all is, which is an incredibly helpful message for families. Instead of feeling, as we heard earlier today, feeling like they're actually the cause of all of this, and why isn't this fixed yet, and your kid is still struggling, oh my goodness. It's validating how much you're in this mix and you're trying to help, and there's still difficulties. So this is sort of the list of things that you get from having that sort of view of self-compassion, not as a pep talk, but as a reality sandwich that I'm going to allow myself to eat, that contains things I like and things I don't like, and but this is true. This is actually what's happening. That truth and accepting what's actually happening is, again, back to the stigma part of this, so much harder to do when the toxicity around accepting that reality is ever present. So there's, I'm just going to describe this to you in 1 minute. There's an exercise we do, which I would have loved to do with all of you, but we're out of time, which is a exercise for anybody who's in this work around shame, which is to just, the exercise very briefly is to write down something on a piece of paper that causes you significant shame, that you really wouldn't want anybody in this room to know about, that makes you feel bad about yourself. And fold it up and hold it and see what it's like to hold that. And then consider handing it to the person next to you. And that's where the heart rate in the whole room goes up to double. And would you allow yourself to do that with knowing that no one's going to read it, and handing it over to the person next to you and letting them hold it? And then experiencing what it's like for you to hold someone else's shame. And then take it back and see what it's like holding yours again. Okay. That is typically an exercise that people's response to is, you freaked me out, first of all, by asking me to write that down. Where's the paper shredder? I don't want anyone in this room to see this. I hold my partner's shame much more lightly and with much more compassion. I didn't feel bad about her shame, which I knew was written on here. I just felt bad about mine, because mine is the worst, much worse than anybody else's in this room. So part of the point of that exercise is that's what families walk in with us. And we're giving them lots of exercises and cool stuff to do, and they're suffering. And they're feeling horrible, and they don't even want to be in your office, and they don't want to talk about this, and they don't want to talk about it with anybody else. And how do we create a space where that degree of shame and crushing stigma doesn't silence them and allows them to still talk about this? So that's a little slice of invitation to change. We focused on this piece today because it's less about like behavioral reinforcement and communication stuff, and more about ourselves as helpers. And that really applies not just to family members, but really to ourselves as professionals in this role. All of these questions and all this self-awareness is important for us too. And I think if we polled everybody in this room, the number of people who are in this profession who don't have own personal experience, either themselves or with family members, is kind of small. So it's particularly activating and relevant for all of us in that context as well. See all those cool exercises and videos we got for you and everything. They're awesome. You guys wouldn't believe how good they are. Oh, I just reached the end of the slides. How do I get back to the... I wanted to have the one with the... Anyway, how do you get to our website? There was a barcode, which I've gone past on the slides. Ooh, he got it back up. Now I got to go to the end again. And we do these groups, these trainings for, as I said, everybody, including lots of folks, just lay people in communities. So right now there's like 60 ITC groups going on around the country and around the world. We just did a whole training in Uganda. And anybody can come to them. They're almost always free because they're just provided by people for free, which is the idea, to create a self-help network that is not predicated on us as professionals. God bless us, but it's not predicated on us, okay? It's predicated on lay people and communities adopting these practices and these understandings and doing these groups in all kinds of forms. I'm just trying to not go past the last slide again. Okay, there it is. Is that the last slide? Yeah, you don't know. So you can look at our resources. This is a nonprofit. It's all there for anybody who wants it and to download and take all these resources. We have some handouts for groups that are available. We also just started there's a flyer for Spanish-speaking groups, which we just translated these materials into Spanish. And we're doing our first pilot group in Spanish. And so we're just trying to broaden the base and make this as accessible as possible. So thank you, and nice talking to you.